Thank you, colleagues, and welcome back to the committee meeting. I'd now call Amendment 148 in the name of Maggie Chapman, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Maggie Chapman to move Amendment 148 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Convener, and I move Amendment 148 in my name. There are three sets of amendments in this group, and I'll take each of them in turn. Amendment 158 and its consequentials 148, 149, 159, 160 and 185 allow the Scottish Government to introduce an emergency national rent control system. Members of the committee will remember the emergency powers that we had to introduce in great rush during COVID, and Amendment 158 in my name is simply aimed at not having to rush to reinstate these powers, should the unthinkable happen again, and we have a similar public health or other emergency. It's a simple precautionary measure. We don't need to go through the process of an emergency bill because we already have the powers. That doesn't mean to say that ministers have to use them, but they have the opportunity to do so if circumstances call for them. So it's a precautionary measure. Amendment 199, with consequentials 186 and 196, seek to reinstate the transitional provisions that offered some protection to tenants ahead of rent control areas coming into force. These transitional provisions, these protections expired at the end of March this year, exposing renters to unacceptable rises in rents above the protected level of 12%. That those protections limited. These measures were meant to act as a bridge to the bill's controls, and it makes absolutely no sense for those to have lapsed before rent control areas are in place and this bill has achieved royal assent. I would go as far as to say that knowingly allowing these protections to lapse was reckless. No impact assessment was undertaken before allowing these powers to lapse, and it will be renters on lower incomes that can least afford such uncontrolled hikes that have virtually no protections now. The Scottish Government, who support rent controls, is allowing rents to soar in the 2 years before its own new rent control measures come into force. Landlords can and are using this to hike rents before rent control measures begin. The Scottish Government told this very committee, and I quote, "If we were to move directly from the emergency measures by switching them off entirely at some point in the future and go back to open market comparisons for rent adjudication, there would be severe and unintended consequences." End quote. Severe and unintended consequences. That's exactly what we are seeing right now, and we need to act. That's what that group of amendments does. My third and final set of amendments, 424, 425 and 526 in this group, introduce special rent control areas. These work much in the same way as rent control areas, but would allow rents to increase by a lower amount than specified in the central formula, or to be frozen, or indeed to be cut. These powers, we believe, are crucial. Rents have increased by grotesque amounts in some areas of Scotland, over 100%, as we've already heard this morning. And the central formula, that CPI plus 1% up to a maximum of 6%, does nothing to address this. In Glasgow, in Lothian, in some other areas with large recent increases, there will be a very strong case to apply short-term controls, which allows much tighter limits on rent. If we don't do this, we're essentially endorsing the unacceptable increases we have seen in recent years. I'm very happy to discuss with colleagues whether these tighter controls require different processes for approval, different standards for evidence, and other safeguards. I've already limited the lifetime of special rent control areas to 1 year. But I do hope that we can agree on the principle that there will be some areas in which tighter controls will be needed temporarily. Recognising that principle means we should then do something about it. And that's what my amendments seek to do. So I hope colleagues can support that principle and therefore these amendments. And I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Maggie. I don't see any other members wishing to contribute, so could I call on the Cabinet Secretary, please?
Thank you, Convener. Amendments 148, 149, 158, 159, 160 and 185 in the name of Maggie Chapman would collectively enable Scottish Ministers to designate the whole of Scotland as a national rent control area in certain circumstances. Introducing rent controls interferes with the property rights of landlords, and any interference must be proportionate. A national rent cap may be difficult to justify due to the varying social and economic circumstances across the country. The way this amendment is drafted means that the safeguards for normal rent control areas would not apply, and without those safeguards it may not be possible to impose a national rent cap that is proportionate. The measures in the bill create the framework to deliver a nationally consistent approach to the consideration of the need for rent control, whilst maintaining the link to local circumstances. I am clear that this is an appropriate, robust way to deliver rent control in Scotland. And whilst I'll acknowledge that there could be circumstances where the Scottish Ministers might wish to consider wider temporary rent control measures, the powers of Scottish Ministers under Maggie Chapman's proposed amendments are far too broad. Our vision for a long-term system of rent controls which delivers a nationally consistent approach with flexibility of local circumstances is key. Should action on rents be required where there has been significant change in rent levels or the rate of rent increases in the period between the 5-yearly cycle of local authority assessments, there are already powers in the bill for local authorities to carry out additional interim assessment of rent conditions in its area, or for Scottish Ministers to direct a local authority to undertake such an assessment. Should such extreme circumstances arise in the future which necessitate a blanket national rent cap which would apply regardless of local circumstances, this would be a significant intervention and would not be appropriate for this to happen through regulations only. Such action should be subject to the full parliamentary scrutiny afforded to primary legislation, as was the case with the emergency legislation introduced by the Government in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I therefore cannot support amendments 148, 149, 158, 159, 160 and 185 and would urge Maggie Chapman not to press. Turning to amendments 186, 196 and 199 in the name of Maggie Chapman, these amendments would essentially reintroduce the temporary modifications to rent adjudication set out in the Rent Adjudication Temporary Modifications Scotland Regulations 2024, which expired at the end of March. Whilst I recognise the good intent behind these amendments and the desire to protect tenants from unreasonable in-tenancy rent increases, I cannot support the amendments. The temporary modifications were developed specifically to support the transition away from the emergency rent cap introduced under the Cost of Living Act 2022. The temporary changes were part of that transition and aimed to prevent a return to market rents in a single step where a tenant sought a review. They were not designed or indeed able to operate until rent control becomes operational.
Intervention on that point. I hear that CABSEC say that those measures were not designed to be transitionary, but then why is it that this committee was told that they were? That actually having a gap between the measures and RCAs coming into force would be extreme and problematic?
Well, I appreciate that Maggie Chapman is frustrated by that gap, but I would go back to the point that I've made around the fact that these were transitional arrangements, and as I'll go on to say in my remarks, it was important that we supported people through that transition out of the emergency rent cap, but it was intended to be temporary and exercisable only on or in anticipation of the expiry of the rent cap measure under the Cost of Living Act and through regulations approved by Parliament that could apply for a 12-month period. So I again go back to the fact they were not designed to be a bridging mechanism to the longer-term rent controls. The existing mechanism for adjudicating rent increases under the 2016 Act, which is based on open market rent, will continue to operate and is intended to continue to ensure we protect tenants from unreasonable rent increases. I cannot support amendments 186, 196 and 199 and would urge Maggie Chapman again not to press, and if pressed, I would urge committee members not to support. Amendment 424, 425 and 426 in the name of Maggie Chapman would provide for the introduction of a special rent control area. In these areas, a rent cap could be set for up to 1 year, which would be below the level of the rent cap that would be applied under my Amendment 332. Maggie Chapman's amendments would enable the rent cap in a special rent control area to be set at 0% or even a negative figure requiring landlords to reduce rents. Now, while I recognise Maggie Chapman has concerns with the fixed rent cap being proposed in my Amendment 332, I consider that this is necessary to provide clarity for landlords, tenants and investors on the impact of rent control in those areas where it will apply. These amendments would remove that clarity and would reintroduce uncertainty that landlords and particularly investors have called on the Scottish Government to address. And for those reasons, I would urge Maggie Chapman not to press Amendments 424, 425 and 426. And if they are pressed, I would encourage members of the committee not to vote for them. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Could I invite Maggie Chapman to wind up, Maggie, and press or withdraw Amendment 148?
Thanks very much, Convener. Very briefly, in taking those three sets again, on the national rent cap, I acknowledge that it doesn't take into account geographical variation, but that's kind of the point. It's a national system designed for a situation where there are external pressures that are extraordinary. And I appreciate what the Cabinet Secretary says, that these are broad powers and local authorities have interim assessment powers within the existing framework. But I think there may well be instances that we do need to act very quickly. And having the powers to do so, I believe, would give some comfort to renters who don't necessarily have the leeway to cope with external shocks. That's why we introduced the emergency provisions we did a few years ago. This just gives ministers the powers to do that again. And like I say, it doesn't require them to do so. On the protections that expired at the end of March this year, I think I take issue with what the Cabinet Secretary has said about them not intended to be a bridge. The housing bill was supposed to be much further along in this term of Parliament than it is at the moment, and we did expect rent controls to be in place by now, so they were bridging mechanisms. I think the fact that there was no impact assessment done means that we actually won't have the Scottish Government has no idea what the negative impact on renters of the loss of those protections will be. Finally, on special rent control areas, this is a temporary measure that would deal with hyper-local areas, but I appreciate that the Cabinet Secretary says that. I appreciate what the Cabinet Secretary says, that these are perhaps too far, that these powers to give are too far. But I wonder whether there is scope for conversation if there are within an area that a local authority has already designated as a rent control area. If there's a very specific hyperlocal issue, is there any opportunity for us to consider? And I'd appreciate an intervention from the Cabinet Secretary on that point.
If I may, Convener, thank you. Again, I absolutely do see where Maggie Chapman is coming from, and I think we'll come back to this in various different parts of this bill, about trying to make sure we make this bill as nuanced as possible. But our determination within the government to be able to provide clarity to tenants, to landlords and to investors on a number of aspects. So I'd be happy to discuss this issue with Maggie Chapman in the run-up for stage 3. But I would say to her that within all of those discussions, the one aspect which I am absolutely have as a foundation to all those discussions is to ensuring that we can provide clarity to investors, and I would be hugely reticent to do anything that would detract from that clarity that the government is seeking to put into the bill through its amendments at stage 2.
Okay, I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that. I'll close, Convener, and I will press Amendment 148, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 148 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed, and so there will be a division. Could I ask those in favour of Amendment 148 show their hands, please? And those against 148, please show their hands. Any abstentions? And the result of Amendment 148 is 1 vote for and 6 votes against. The amendment is disagreed to. Thank you, colleagues. I now call Amendment 282 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 281. Now, can I remind members that if Amendment 282 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendments 94, 95, 96 and 97 debated in the group designation of rent control areas, assessments, reports and designation due to pre-emption. The Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 282 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes, we are agreed. Call Amendment 149 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 148. Maggie Chapman to move or not to move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 149 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
No, we are not agreed. So there will be a division again, colleagues. Those in favour of the amendment, please show your hands. Those against? Any abstentions? No. The result on Amendment 149 is 1 vote for and 6 votes against. The amendment is disagreed to. Thank you. Could I call now Amendment 283 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 281. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 283 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
No. There will be a division again, please, on division in Amendment 283. Those in favour of the amendment, please show your hands. And those against? And any abstentions? On Amendment 283, there were four votes for and 3 votes against. The amendment is therefore agreed to. Now call Amendment 207 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 281. Rachel Hamilton to move or not move? Moved. So the question is that Amendment 207 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
No. There will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 207, please show your hands. Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. On Amendment 207, there were 4 votes for and 3 votes against. The amendment is agreed to. I now call Amendment 98 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 85. Megan Gallagher to move or not move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 98 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
No. We are not agreed, so there will be a division once more. Those in favour of Amendment 98, please show. Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. On Amendment 98, there were 2 votes for the amendment and 5 votes against the amendment. It is therefore disagreed to. I now call Amendment 284 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with 281. The Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is Amendment 284 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes? No, sorry, I didn't hear you there. There will be a division. on that amendment. Those in favour of Amendment 284, please show. Those against? Any abstentions? On Amendment 284, there were 5 votes for and 2 votes against. The amendment is therefore agreed to. I now call Amendment 285 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 281. The Minister to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 285 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
No. There will be a division once again on that amendment, on Amendment 285. Those in favour of Amendment 285, please show hands. And those against? And any abstentions? Thank you very much. So Amendment 285, there were 5 votes for and 2 votes against. The amendment is agreed to. The amendment is agreed to. Thank you. Now, 286. The question is that Amendment 286 be agreed to. Are we all... Oh, beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. I call Amendment 286 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 281. And also to remind members that if Amendment 286 is agreed to, I can't call Amendment 55, debated in the group Student Tenancies and Accommodation due to pre-emption. The Minister to move formally, please.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 286 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes, we are agreed. I call now Amendments 99 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 85. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
Move, please.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 99 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
No, we are not agreed, so there will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 99, please show. Those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. On Amendment 99, there were 2 votes in favour and 5 votes against. The amendment is therefore disagreed to.
Then you want to go to 287.
Aye, good, good. I now call Amendment 287 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 281. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 287 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes, we are agreed. Thank you. I call Amendment 288 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 281. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 288 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes, agreed. Thank you. I call Amendment 289 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 281. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you.
So yes, I need to call that one before you.
Yes, I need to call Amendment 289A in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 281. Maggie Chapman to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 289A be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
No, we are not agreed. So, those in favour of Amendment 289A, please show. Those against? Any abstentions? So on 289A, there were 2 votes in favour and 5 votes against. The amendment is therefore disagreed to. 289, yeah. The Minister to press or withdraw Amendment 289.
Press.
Press. The question is Amendment 289 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. I call Amendment 100 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 85. Megan Gallagher, to move or not to move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 100 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
No. We're not agreed, so there will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 100, please show. Those against? And any abstentions? On Amendment 100, there were 2 votes for and 5 votes against. The amendment is disagreed to.
So then you move on to the next. Yeah.
Okay. I now call Amendment 290 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 281. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. Okay, it's just coming.
Start again.
I'm calling Amendment 290 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 281, and Cabinet Secretary invited to move formally again.
Moved.
Thank you. So I call Amendment 290A in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 281. Maggie Chapman to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you.
Apologies.
The question is that Amendment 290A be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
No, we are not agreed. Those in favour of Amendment 290A, please raise your hands. Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. On Amendment 290A, there were 2 votes in favour and 5 votes against. The amendment is therefore disagreed to.
Okay, so then this one.
290, yep. Call on the Cabinet Secretary to press or withdraw Amendment 290.
Press.
Question is that Amendment 290 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes, yes, we are agreed. I call Amendment 291 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with 281. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 291 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. Thank you. I call Amendment 292 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 281. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 292 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. Thank you. Call Amendment 293 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 281. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. And 298. I call Amendment 293A in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 281. Maggie Chapman to move or not to move?
Moved.
Moved. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 293A be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
No, we are not agreed. Those in favour of Amendment 293A, please show. And those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. On Amendment 293A, there was 1 vote in favour and 6 against. The amendment is therefore disagreed to. Now, 293. The Cabinet Secretary to now press or withdraw Amendment 293.
Press.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 293 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes, we're agreed. Thank you. I call Amendment 101 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 85. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved, thank you. The question is that Amendment 101 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
No. We are not agreed, so there will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 101, please show. Thank you. And those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. On Amendment 101, there were 2 votes in favour of that amendment and 5 votes against. The amendment is therefore disagreed to.
So now you move on to the next debate.
Agree. Okay, this one, yeah. Thank you. I now call Amendment 102 in the name of Megan Gallagher, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Megan Gallagher to move Amendment 102 and speak to all amendments in the group. Megan.
Thank you, Convener, and I move 102. The reason for submitting this amendment was in case, in the event of my amendments to remove Part 1 of the bill should fail, that there would be a strong showing in terms of what my party believes should be contained within exempt properties. And at the time of submitting this amendment, this was of course before the consultation to exemptions on rent controls went live. The Amendment 102 alters the bill from Scottish Ministers from may to must by regulations define, for the purpose of section 9(3), what is an exempt property. I suspect that the Cabinet Secretary will ask members to vote down this amendment today if pressed. However, I still do have concerns regarding the process of exemptions, and this provides me the opportunity to put this on record today. By not including exemptions in primary legislation and tabling them as part of secondary legislations, it means less opportunities for MSPs to debate and further the agreed exemptions following the conclusion of exemption consultation. At best, the housing sector, as it stands, will need to rely on the Cabinet Secretary applying and deciding what exemptions are preferable, meaning that some important exemptions could, and I hope not, be left out. That's why several colleagues, I believe, have tabled amendments in this section of the bill. I don't believe that it's the best way to move forward with this legislation. I would have preferred to have seen exemptions within primary legislation. I think that would have given a stronger signal to the sector that there will be protections in place from rent controls. Secondary legislation, of course, is also easier to amend, and I'm seeking reassurance from the Cabinet Secretary today that exemptions will be taken seriously and to ensure all responses from stakeholders will be considered when the Scottish Government begins to scrutinise on consultation findings. The sector does need clarity, and I'm hoping that the Cabinet Secretary understands how important this section is to the future of the housing sector itself, and of course securing future investment to build more homes. And that includes issues of which we debated last week, and I've again, as Graham Simpson outlined earlier, I've also had the opportunity to speak to the Cabinet Secretary following the committee debate last week, and to have initial discussions on how we move forward with this legislation, particularly surrounding exemptions, but of course other issues which were debated at the committee session last week. I think we do need to reflect on last week's session when moving forward. The bill is of course complex, and it's important that the government outlines their positioning on issues that are raised by members as part of stage 2. But going back to the exemption part of this legislation, my party does not believe that rent controls are the answer. We need to ensure that all groups impacted by this bill are taken into consideration, and that of course includes those who provide homes for people within the private rented sector. If I move on to Amendment 103, this ensures that social landlords are exempt from rent controls or a subsidiary of registered social landlords. I think this one is a no-brainer. I'm hoping that this one will be the top of the Scottish Government's list in terms of exemptions. Social landlords, of course, provide affordable housing to many people across the country, and in the case of councils, rents are set by councillors themselves. Rents accrued are usually placed into a budget that is invested to carry out repairs, maintenance, aesthetics to exterior and interior design, and that of course benefits both the tenant and the council's reputation. The concern I have about exemptions, expanding on the point that I've already raised previously, is that in many cases the housing sector will need to wait until the consultation is concluded and those findings are analysed and brought forward in terms of a plan. I think that could again further stifle development. We don't want to see that, and it's imperative for members to think about this today when looking at exemptions and whether they believe that out of the list of amendments that we have before us, that some of them have merit and could or should be on the face of the bill. 106 complements 103, defining registered social landlords and subsidiaries. 104, exemption of rent controls for properties with cladding or rack. Again, this is another amendment that's self-explanatory. and complements my colleague Graham Simpson's amendment, whereby any unintended considerable costs to remediate buildings with cladding or rack should be exempt from rent controls. And the reason I bring this forward is due to concerns that we have raised and had debates surrounding both in the Chamber but also at committee as well. Of course, we still don't know how many properties these types of that have these particular types of materials, and landlords will have to foot the bill to ensure that the properties are safe for their own tenants to use. The only way that some of these landlords would be able to recoup some of that money would be to raise rent at a sensible rate. So I urge through this amendment for the Scottish Government to consider these particular types of property when looking at exemptions, but I'm certain that this of course will form part of the consultation in terms of responses that the Government will receive. 105 relates to issues where landlords are conducting works to the property to become EPC compliant. Again, these issues have been discussed at committee, and although we have yet to see what the final EPC consultation will conclude, landlords may or are currently considering how best to improve their properties. This again comes at a substantial cost, especially when looking to decarbonise homes, particularly in rural areas. Therefore, I hope the Minister is sympathetic to my amendment that encourages landlords to act responsibly for the benefit of achieving net zero, but also understanding costs that are associated with this. And at present, there is of course a consultation underway to review EPC, and although this is welcomed, I do believe this comes at a conflicting time when we're considering the housing bill. It might have been better to have had this consultation concluded, because again this could or may form part of exemptions when we get to that particular part of this legislation. 134 looks to create an exemption to rent controls for smaller landlords. For example, a landlord who has no more than 2 other let properties. Again, the reason for this amendment is to ensure that smaller landlords do not continue to leave the market because of rent controls that could be put in place. I think this is a measured approach, and again hope to see this form part of the consultation once it concludes. 329K, again, is another important exemption I believe that the Scottish Government needs to consider. Charities such as Right There are working to prevent people from becoming homeless and separated from loved ones. They, of course, work alongside the private rented sector to secure homes, to prevent people from becoming homelessness, and their end goal is to ensure that every person has somewhere safe to call a home. Landlords, and we've heard this in terms of members speaking previously, are often demonised, but again this is another exceptional example of work that they undertake to provide people with a home, but also working alongside our incredible charities who serve to help and support people who need it. Again, I hope that this is the feedback that is received within the consultation includes this particular sector, as I wouldn't want them to be left out in terms of exemptions that could be brought forward. 109 relates to, I'm double checking that I've not went too ahead of myself. Yes, I've went too ahead of myself, Convener. I will leave my remarks there just now because I do believe I'm coming back to talk to Edward Mountain's amendments. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Meg. I was just about to invite you to ask you if you're speaking to Edward Mountain's Amendment 150, and if so, please speak to that amendment and the other amendments in that group.
Thank you very much again, Convener. So turning to my colleague Edward Mountain's amendments in this section, 150 relates to Scottish Ministers providing definitions of which properties are exempt within 6 months. Again, we need to look at a measured approach and make sure that exempt properties are brought forward within a suitable time frame, but also to provide clarity to the sector as well. 151, I believe, is an important exemption that's been brought forward by my colleague, as it exempts military accommodation from rent controls. Again, I do believe this is a no-brainer and hope that that is brought forward in terms of feedback from the consultation. 152 exempts any property for which the tenant is an employee of the landlord. Again, I think this will relate to many farms, many rural dwellings that should be taken into consideration. Of course, we need to make sure that the family farm or any farms are thriving enterprise. So we need to make sure that we're looking at exemptions in this area as well. I do believe that's it just now. Yes, Convener, I will leave my remarks there. Thank you.
Very much for that, Megan. Could I now invite Rachel Hamilton, please, to speak to Amendment 208 and other amendments in the group. Rachel.
Thank you, Convener. And I agree with Megan Gallagher around the exemptions that we would like to see in primary legislation rather than waiting for a consultation which has been worrying the sector. Amendment 208 would allow ministers to exempt properties from rent controls if significant upgrades like energy efficiency improvements have been made. A crucial point to recognise is that a property before improvements is fundamentally different from the same property after upgrades. This transformation naturally warrants a revised rental valuation. And why does this matter? Because housing providers repeatedly told the committee that rent controls risk discouraging investment in property upgrades as they fear they won't be able to recover the costs. This exemption solves two problems. It gives landlords a fair route to adjust rents when they've generally improved property, and it ensures tenants will benefit from better, more energy efficient homes. As well, most upgrades happen between tenancies, and allowing reasonable rent adjustments during this window creates a clear incentive to invest in quality improvements. Rent controls, as we know, shouldn't be a barrier to better housing, and this exemption turns them into a catalyst for upgrades for Scotland's housing stock needs. Amendment 209 would allow ministers to exempt properties from rent controls if they're let at rates comparable to social or local authority housing. Housing providers offering rents in line with secure tenancies should be able to adjust them in step with local authority or social housing increase. Positive actions by landlords should be encouraged. These rent levels are already well below market rates, and in most cases, any increases would still fall within rent control limits. The exemption acts as a safety net, protecting providers offering below market rents from unexpected cost spikes, especially those affecting the wider social housing sector, and it will reassure landlords who choose to charge low rents that they will not be penalised for doing so through rent control. Building on that amendment, both amendments, 2009 and 2010, it expands the scope of rent control exemptions to include properties where rent is already restricted for other reasons. It covers cases like reduced rent agreements during financial hardship, for example, the pandemic, or housing provided to a former employee at a peppercorn rate. These are situations where rent has been kept intentionally below market value for valid, often temporary reasons, and this amendment gives housing providers a fair opportunity to reset rents to market levels between tenancies, ensuring long-term sustainability without penalising past goodwill. This amendment ensures that providers who've acted responsibly and compassionately aren't locked into artificially low rents indefinitely. Amendment 2011 directly addresses a key concern raised by stakeholders that rent control risks driving out investment, which we've heard a lot about today, especially in new housing developments from large-scale build-to-rent projects to small rural developments, specifically for the local rental market. The message from the sector, again, was clear. Without confidence in a fair return, developers will walk away. This amendment provides that confidence. The build-to-rent market has illustrated this in recent years as investment has been redirected away from Scotland. Scotland's housing crisis is driven by a shortage of supply, not affordability. 211 recognises this reality and ensures the bill supports, not stifles, the delivery of new rental homes. In practice, it gives investors and developers a green light to build, knowing their ability to recover costs and earn a return won't be undermined by future rent control measures. The result will be more homes, more choice, and a stronger rental market, exactly what Scotland needs. Amendment 212 is a consequential amendment to 209, clarifying what is meant by build-to-rent and outlining that the exemption would apply for the first 2 years after the development of the property has been completed. Amendment 566 is a consequential amendment to 211, clarifying what is meant by build-to-rent and outlining that the exemption would apply for the first 2 years after the development of the property has been completed. Following committee proceedings last week, I updated this amendment to include within the definition rural properties built for rent under a relevant tenancy. This ensures that rural developments which are built exclusively for rent are explicitly encompassed by this definition. And finally, these types of rural developments are usually built out of necessity and are rarely economically viable. Nevertheless, they are critical to boost the supply of rental housing across rural Scotland. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I now call Mark Griffin to speak to Amendment 411 and other amendments in the group. Mark.
Thank you, Convener. Our absolute priority should be to end the housing emergency by increasing supply across all tenures. So I think the debate and discussion around exemptions is particularly crucial, and that anything that we do in the bill should be with the aim of not impacting on the supply of new houses. So I do think that in including mid-market rent homes, there is a real risk that efforts to regulate rental prices have the effect of cutting off affordable housing supply and exacerbating the causes of the housing emergency. I'm satisfied that the Scottish Housing Regulator monitors and regulates rent in mid-market rental properties and their subsidiaries to ensure that they are affordable and fair, and so I don't believe that subjecting them to rent control measures in this bill will do anything to further deal with the symptoms of the housing emergency, and in dissuading investors from this area could well exacerbate the cause. I'm also satisfied that over the lengthy rounds of consultation and evidence, and through the Housing Minister's desire to meet with housing providers and talk to them, that these organisations have successfully argued the point about exemption of mid-market rent. And I think when we had the discussion on the emergency legislation, there was an acknowledgement then that mid-market rent should not have been caught up with that, and that would be an issue that would be addressed when it came to the permanent rent controls. Social and affordable housing, including mid-market rent tenancies and their subsidiaries, should not be caught by rent control provisions, and similarly where government grants require rents to align with local affordable rents overseen by the Scottish Housing Regulator, current affordability controls are more than adequate, and so these types of properties should be exempt from additional rent controls measures. That was Amendment 411 on mid-market rent. On Amendment 416 in my name, I think the Government has already in effect conceded that these types of properties should be subject to exemptions in its consultation. It proposes exemptions for build-to-rent, including single-family rental and mid-market rent schemes, alongside sensible carve-outs for properties let below market value or significantly upgraded or improved. The consultation document recognises that investment won't flow into a market limited by rent controls, and so again, including build-to-rent properties in rent control is likely to exacerbate the symptoms of the housing emergency rather than increasing the much-needed supply of houses across all tenures, as can be seen by the sharp decline in properties being progressed in the figures that I think we've just seen released today. I believe that these arguments have already been rehearsed fully. There's really no need to continue with the uncertainty surrounding this particular area of the bill. My amendment also seeks to define build-to-rent properties as broadly as possible, as well as ensure that the sector is protected across as many tenures as possible. Now, I appreciate that the Government aren't opposed to the principle of these amendments, but have expressed concerns that they could give rise to a legal challenge, and that these issues are best addressed through the consultation. And I'm happy not to move these amendments, Convener, with the expectation that the sector have clarity on these issues before the final stage 3 vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Could I call on the Cabinet Secretary now to speak to Amendment 329 and other amendments in the group? Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Convener. This group of amendments relates to the provisions within the bill that create a power for Scottish ministers to exempt certain properties from rent controls by regulations. While I cannot support the amendments of other members in this group, I do agree with the importance of ensuring that full consideration is given to the circumstances in which it may be appropriate to make exemptions. That is why we have published the consultation on the use of these powers, to ensure that the impact on landlords and tenants of any exemption that might be provided for in regulations is fully understood. Let me repeat what I said earlier. Convener, I am completely convinced of the need to use these powers in the bill to exempt, where appropriate, certain categories of property from rent control and to allow rent increases above the level of the cap in certain circumstances. And members have already raised many compelling arguments for that today. However, this must be supported by consultation which ensures that the impact of the measures is fully understood and their actions do not create any unintended consequences, taking into account the views of everyone with an interest. With reference to amendments in this group, we have asked specific questions about possible exemptions for mid-market rent and build-to-rent properties. Alongside this, there are opportunities for landlords and investors who do not see their circumstances reflected in the specific questions to give us their views, and for tenants to give us their opinions on how these proposals will impact on them, and we will consider every and all of those points as it comes forward in the consultation. Turning to the amendments 329, 330 and 331 in the name of Paul McClellan, 329 and 331 have the effect of moving the power to define an exempt property in section 13 of the bill so that it appears in other legislation alongside the rent controls to which it relates. This flows from the amendments previously debated, which would replace the power to set a rent cap in section 9 of the bill with provision for a rent cap in that other legislation. The relocation of the power would make the existing power to define what is an exempt property in section 13 obsolete, and I am therefore also supporting Megan Gallagher's Amendment 107, which was previously debated, as it would remove this resulting obsolete section. Amendment 330 makes a technical correction to the bill to change the reference in the title to new Part 4A of the 2016 Act from excluded properties to exempt properties. Turning now to other amendments in the group, Amendment 102 in the name of Megan Gallagher, 150 in the name of Edward Mountain and 329A in the name of Willie Rennie would make it a duty on the Scottish Ministers to define what is an exempt property by affirmative regulations. However, those regulations cannot be made without the approval of the Scottish Parliament, meaning that compliance with this duty is not entirely within the gift of Scottish Ministers. I agree that it is essential that exemptions are provided for, but imposing this as a duty on the Scottish Ministers is not the right way to progress this. And accordingly, I would ask the members not to press amendments 102, 150 and 329A, and if pressed, committee not to support. Turning to amendments 130, 105, 106 in the name of Megan Gallagher, and 208 to 212 and 566 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, and 411 and 416 in the name of Mark Griffin, and 329B to 329D and 329G to 329I in the name of Willie Rennie. All of these amendments collectively set out potential exemptions from rent control in the bill, covering properties let by subsidiaries of landlords, including those delivering mid-market rent, build-to-rent properties, properties subject to improvements, including energy efficiency, and properties which have been offered for a rent at below-market rates. While I absolutely understand the reasons behind those amendments, I do not think they should be included as exemptions on the face of the bill. The reason for this approach is that exemptions need to be fully informed by consultation with stakeholders to ensure they are framed so as to ensure they disapply rent control in the appropriate circumstances and do not capture circumstances where rent control should apply.
I understand what the Cabinet Secretary is saying, but with respect, the amendments that have been brought forward have been agreed in consultation with quite a number of those who are concerned that these exemptions should be brought forward without having to have a consultation.
I absolutely do hear the point that Rachel Hamilton is making. I would point to the nuance in her thing that most of the people, or what the exact phrase that she used, would agree with them. As I said earlier, I am very, very minded to take on board the points that have been raised to me. That's exactly why the consultation is phrased in the way that it is. And has been brought forward. And we've taken some criticism from others to not have that consultation at the end of a bill, but to have it there. But it's exactly because I want to provide that clarity. And if there was another way of doing it quicker, I could assure the member I would do it, because I want to get to the same point that she is at about providing that clarity. But I do believe it has to happen in that consultation. Convener, Amendment 104 in the name of Megan Gallagher would require the Scottish Ministers to exempt from rent control let properties for the duration that works are being undertaken by the landlord to eliminate or mitigate the risks to human life connected with any building materials, including cladding and rack. This amendment would allow unrestricted rent increases for properties in rent control areas where there are risks to the tenant's life, whereas properties which do not contain such risks would be subject to the rent cap. Accordingly, I cannot support this amendment, but I do understand and expect those discussions to be in the consultation and look forward to reading further on the views within the consultation on that area. Amendment 134 in the name of Megan Gallagher would require the Scottish Ministers to exempt from rent control properties let by landlords who have 3 or fewer rented properties. Whilst we are committed to ensuring that we deliver a system of rent controls that values the contributions that private landlords make, this must be balanced against the purpose of rent controls in terms of stabilising rents. As Amendment 134 would exempt a significant number of landlords, and my understanding is it would be around 89% of landlords at this time, I cannot support this amendment. Amendment 151 in the name of Edward Mountain seeks to exempt from rent control all properties let by the Secretary of State for Defence. This amendment is not required. Where the landlord is the Secretary of State for Defence, a tenancy cannot be a private residential tenancy and will not therefore be covered by rent control. Amendment 152 in the name of Edward Mountain seeks to amend Section 13 of the Bill to require Scottish Ministers to exempt from rent control by regulations properties let under relevant tenancies to an employee of the landlord. I am uncertain as to the rationale for not extending rent control to tenants on the basis of the tenancy being offered by an employer, as it cannot be presumed that such tenancies are not offered at or near to market rent. As such, I cannot support the amendment. Amendments 329E and 329F in the name of Maggie Chapman would oblige Scottish Ministers to only exempt property where the charge for that property is at or below the local housing allowance rate for that area or the social housing rate for that area. This would remove the discretion of Scottish Ministers to exempt any other category of property where the rent was charged above these levels, which is presumably not the intention of the amendments. The amendments do not clarify what is meant by local housing allowance rate or social housing rate, and I cannot support the amendment for these reasons.
On that point. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking an intervention. Local housing allowance is determined, it's well understood, it's published in fact on the Scottish Government's website. So I'm a little bit unsure as to why she says she doesn't understand what is meant by local housing allowance. Right. It's published. Rent officers provide that information as the 30th percentile of local rented accommodation. I'm struggling to understand her question there.
I think the concern is it's not a legal definition, and it is subject to change and to understanding, for example, of changes from the UK government. So it's not something that I think would be sensible to base our legislation on. Amendment 329J from Maggie Chapman would put restrictions on the types of property that can be excluded from rent control so as to prevent tenancies where the landlord is a registered social landlord or a subsidiary of such a landlord from being exempt from rent control. Tenancies where the landlord is a registered social landlord cannot be private residential tenancies, so wouldn't be caught by rent control in any event. This amendment would also prevent certain mid-market rent tenancies from being exempted, and I can see no reason for such a restriction on the powers to exempt properties from rent control, and therefore cannot support the amendment. Amendments 329K and 329L in the name of Megan Gallagher provide that there must be an exemption from rent control for landlords who work with charities whose purpose includes the prevention of homelessness. This exemption is very widely framed, as doesn't specify the nature or duration of that work. I cannot support this restriction on the exemption powers, but I'm sure, as Ms Gallagher mentioned in her opening remarks, it will be something that again will come forward in the consultation, and Government will have a view to that at that time. Amendment 329M in the name of Maggie Chapman would place a restriction on the types of property that can be excluded from rent control so as to prevent tenancies in build-to-rent properties from being exempt from rent control. An exemption for build-to-rent properties is an issue being considered in the consultation, so I can see no reason for creating such a restriction on the powers to exempt properties from rent control, and I therefore cannot support the amendment. I recognise that some stakeholders and members would wish exemptions from rent control in circumstances where landlords may be able to increase rent above the level of the rent cap to be set out in this primary legislation. Others may have concerns about exemptions for specific types of properties and are keen for those not to be included. However, it is essential that decisions in relation to this are formed by full and open consultation, allowing all of those to be affected to have their views considered. This will ensure that the impacts of any decision on the use of these powers are fully understood and that these exemptions and other safeguards are framed in a way that is clear and proportionate. Bringing forward this consultation now to provide clarity will provide the clarity that is being sought and will support us to bring forward secondary legislation at the earliest opportunity following royal assent. I am clear this is the correct approach and can reassure members that engagement will continue while the consultation is underway. And I would invite members who are seeking exemptions or for specific circumstances where rents can be increased above the cap to be defined to continue to engage with us during this consultation and as we develop any future regulations. And again, I commit today to discussing with members before we publish regulations our views on what would be included in those regulations to, I hope, ensure to reassure the point that Megan Gallagher made about the requirement for members to discuss these issues with government before regulations would come before a committee. During engagement with stakeholders, I have heard calls for properties let by social landlords for mid-market rent and build-to-rent properties to be exempt from rent control, and I will acknowledge those calls and confirm that these categories are both included as part of the consultation we published on the 23rd April. There is also space in consultation to cover any other areas where there should be an exemption. Other circumstances where it might be appropriate for a landlord to increase rent above the level of the cap include where the landlord has made improvements to the property or where the landlord has consistently charged a rent that is below market rent, and these are also being considered. On this basis, Convener, I would urge Megan Gallagher, Edward Mountain, Rachel Hamilton, Mark Griffin, Willie Rennie and Maggie Chapman not to press their amendments in this group, and if pressed, I would urge members of the committee not to support the amendments in their names for the reasons I have set out, and would ask the committee to support the amendment in the group named by Paul McClellan.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Could I now invite Willie Rennie to speak to Amendment 329A and other amendments in the group? Willie.
Thank you very much, Convener. I think what we're witnessing is the effects of the change of direction of the Scottish Government over a period of time on housing policy. I think a welcome change of direction. And I think it's an example of where, when we only consider one side of a debate and we don't have a comprehensive understanding of the effect of any proposals, that we have negative impacts, as we've seen with the massive decline in the build-to-rent market over the last year, down something like 26%. And I've got too many constituents and many people across the country who are desperate for a house. And we cannot simply consider one side of the argument. We need to consider the investment, the demand, but also, therefore, the supply. And I think we're broadly getting into that position now. I think the reason why there's lots of proposals coming forward, including mine, on exemptions, is because we really want the government to absolutely confirm that they do understand that and that there is a complete change of direction, which, I have to say, before the confidence wasn't there. And I think we are moving in that direction now, which I'm pleased about. My amendments today, I would prefer to be in the face of the bill to give that clarity and that confidence to investors, but I understand the process that the Minister set out in terms of a consultation. But let me just, for the sake of it, go through what I'm proposing and I hope is reflected in the conclusion of the consultation on exemptions. I'm looking for specific exemptions around the mid-market rent and build-to-rent, which is what the Government have indicated in their consultation paper. But in particular, I want 329B and G for the registered social landlords to be excluded. Now, Mark Griffin was right. There was a debate in the emergency measures around mid-market rent. So this is not a new debate. And at that time, we were unable to get that nailed down, which I think did knock the confidence in the RSL sector, which is one sector of all sectors that we should be encouraging to build more. So I would like to see them excluded altogether from the rent control measures. 329D and I looks to try and give a definition of the mid-market rent for other landlords who are providing that accommodation, and that would be around about half the open market rent. And then I'm looking at the build-to-rent proposals 329C and H. It would be purpose-built, institutionally owned, professionally managed, self-contained, which are actually phrases that I think are included in the government's consultation, but I'd like to see on the face of the bill. I suspect the Cabinet Secretary is not going to give us any response to these particular proposals, but I hope she hears the strength of views of many members who say, certainly.
I hope he did hear during my remarks that I take very seriously this issues. The points that he has raised are exceptionally important, and they have been made loud and clear to me by the sector directly. I'm very keen to pick that up in the consultation at speed afterwards to provide that clarity, just as I hope we did last Thursday when I was absolutely clear that the Scottish Government has no intention of doing anything in this bill to bring in the PBSA sector, and indeed if there was anything done on that basis last week, then we would seek to amend that at stage 3, working with members.
That's very welcome, Cabinet Secretary, on the purpose-built student accommodation, but also on the wider approach. Because I think what we've also learned is that we cannot tackle the housing emergency on our own with the public sector. We need the private sector and private investors to be included in this. And so it's not just specific proposals we're talking about here, it's the rhetoric that we use as well. And the language of exploitative landlords in a generalised way, I think, does not help to provide confidence to those who are seeking to invest. And I think also on that front, I've seen a change of direction from the government, that we've got a much more inclusive approach to tackling the housing emergency. So on that point, I'll conclude.
Willie, I now invite Maggie Chapman to speak to Amendment 329E, Maggie, and other amendments in the group. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Convener. Greens oppose exemptions to rent control measures. To work for renters and to work for landlords, the system does need to be simple and transparent. And I think we broadly have that with the system as established so far. Adding various exemptions if the landlord is an employer of the tenant, is a military landlord, the property is buy-to-let, if the landlord is a social landlord, or other exemptions proposed would make the system excessively complicated. Many renters are already not familiar with their rights. Bringing in a system of rent control but taking it away again for significant numbers of renters will only add to this problem. The Cabinet Secretary has spoken this morning a lot about clarity for landlords and investors. What about clarity for renters? Having so many different exemptions does not provide clarity for tenants themselves. I ask committee members, therefore, not to support most of the amendments in this group, but to support my amendments 329E, F, J and M. 329E and F have been worked up in partnership with Living Rent. If we absolutely must have exemptions, these amendments limit it to properties charging local housing allowance and social rates. So it does have that intention that the Cabinet Secretary outlined. 329J disallows exemptions for mid-market rents. Such an exemption would blow a significant hole in rent controls and mean that many lower-income households are not protected. They would be priced out of so much of the rental market. 329M disallows exemptions for build-to-rent properties. As with 329J, this exemption would mean that the vast majority of new builds, build-to-rents, cannot be controlled under this legislation. So it runs counter to the existential point of this bill. I urge colleagues to consider very carefully the questions about exemptions. Exempting mid-market rents and build-to-rents has the potential to really drive out lower-income households from urban centres, from city centres. It could stoke gentrification. I'd ask members to consider what kinds of city centres we want to create. city centres for everyone, or only for the richer people who can afford areas that are not controlled, where rents are not controlled. So, broadly speaking, I repeat, Scottish Greens do not support exemptions to rent controls, but if we must have exemptions, they should be limited to those properties charging above the local housing allowance rates. Thank you.
I don't see any other members wishing to make a contribution to that. So, beyond that, so I could ask Megan Gallagher, please, to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 102. Megan.
Thank you very much, Convener. And this, as Willie Rennie highlighted, is a really important, I think it was Mark Griffin, is a really important section of the bill. But again, I think the conversation today has been really helpful as well in relation to the exchange between Willie Rennie and the Cabinet Secretary, but also other members who have rightly raised concerns about exemptions not being on the face of the bill. It's still my position that I do believe that certain exemptions should be on the face of the bill, with further consultations in relation to other exemptions being considered thereafter. But I understand, given the position and the direction of travel from the government, that the consultation is live, and therefore we should await to see what responses we receive as part of the consultation process. And I'm sure that the sector will be feeding into the Scottish Government in relation to what exemptions they want to see within secondary legislation, and I hope that the Government takes notice of the exemptions and the concerns that the sector have in relation to making sure that they are protected, so we don't stifle investment, so we can get on with building more homes, tackling our housing emergency, because again, this is what we should be debating. This is what I would suspect a housing bill to be about, would be tackling the housing emergency, but yet I feel as though we're unpicking bits of that debate because of the discussions that we're having at committee as part of the amendments that members have brought forward. I sit on the bill.
Thank you to Megan Gallagher for taking the intervention. We have had a bit of dubiety about when the consultation will be concluded and published, and when we will be able to see that, and the Cabinet Secretary said that herself. So, I mean, we are, I'm thinking here that if we don't move some of the amendments that we've put forward on the exemptions today, I know we haven't got the Green support, but we may have other support. I think it's just about making the point, but if we don't see the shape or the published consultation, we won't be able to bring forward these amendments at stage 3, and that slightly worries me, because this is such an important aspect and part of the bill.
I completely understand where Rachel... Oh, an intervention for an intervention, of course I will, Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful, just to make sure I can get in before Megan Gallagher concludes. I'm unable to find the specific date on which the consultation applies in my weighty folder, but it is due, I think, in July. And thank you, Mr Simpson, for that. And I'm very, very keen to move expeditiously on with the discussions on that in short order afterwards. And thank you to Mr Simpson for your assistance.
And again, this is the risk in terms of how this bill has developed in relation to the consultation when the consultation has been positioned. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for moving the consultation forward, but again, I still have the question, you know, why wasn't this consultation conducted prior to stage 1 of the bill, because I think that would have been a far better place to be. We would know exactly what the sector would be looking for, and then it would of course have been up for members to debate through the process of stage 2 and going into stage 3 in terms of what could be placed within primary legislation or not. But again, that's not where we are. We need to deal with what we've got in front of us, and I think it's imperative for all members to consider whether or not they want to press at this stage, to see whether or not they maybe want to bring that again back at stage 3 should that be their intention. And of course these debates are important not just for committee but for chamber space as well, to make sure that we are standing up and advocating for the sector that it's going to impact the most. So I think it's, you know, imperative on members to come to that conclusion, but also to make sure that we are raising the concerns that have been brought to us. And again, as Rachel Hamilton highlighted, a lot of the amendments in this field have been drafted alongside stakeholders, alongside alongside representatives of the PVI sector and others. So again, it's all about bringing this to, I would say a conclusion, but also with highlighting and clarity from this Cabinet Secretary in terms of the Scottish Government of what we are expecting to see in this bill. But if I can finish on the points that...
Take a quick intervention on the basis that she and I are very keen to ensure there is clarity on a number of issues in this bill. Will she join with me in recognising that the government, and I hope her party, does not want to see the purpose-built student accommodation within this bill, and if there has been anything to do that, then I hope members would be able to work collectively together to rectify that at stage 3 if it is required.
Yes, I will work alongside the Cabinet Secretary, Willie Reddy, and other members in relation to the point that she raises. I think it's important that when we're moving forward, we are making sure we're listening to concerns from the sector, particularly investors. We don't want to stifle that market, and as the position that my party has always been from stage 1, it would be about making sure that, for the Scottish Conservatives, it would be principally opposed to rent controls, but certainly should rent controls be introduced, that we're making sure we're taking the appropriate measured approach. I think that is the best way moving forward. And again, I have welcomed the tone of the debate today and, of course, the exchanges from all members there. I'm not going to continue, Convener. I will hand back over to yourself, but thank you very much.
Are you pressing or withdrawing the amendment 102, Megan? Are you pressing or withdrawing?
I will withdraw.
Okay. Megan Gallagher seeks to withdraw Amendment 102. Members, does any member object to the amendment being withdrawn? If there are no objections, the amendment is withdrawn. Thank you, members. And I call Amendment 150 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 102. Megan Gallagher on behalf of Edward Mountain to move or not.
150. Apologies, Convener, just getting my notes. On this one, I will move.
Move. Okay, thank you. The question is that Amendment 150 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
No. We are not agreed, so there will be division. Those in favour of Amendment 150, please show your hands. And those against 150, please show. And any abstentions? Thank you. On Amendment 150, there were 3 votes in favour and 4 votes against. The amendment is disagreed to. Thank you.
For a different thing. Yes, that one.
I call Amendment 208 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 102. Rachel Hamilton to move or not move.
Convener, could you repeat that? I didn't hear you.
To Amendment 208, 208 in the name of Rachel Hamilton.
Not moved.
Not moved. Okay, thank you. 209. Call Amendment 209, also in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 102. Rachel Hamilton to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. Call Amendment 210, and also in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 102. Rachel Hamilton to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. Call Amendment 103 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 102. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. Thank you. I call Amendment 104 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 102. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call Amendment 105 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 102. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call Amendment 134 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 102. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call Amendment 151 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 102. Megan Gallagher on behalf of Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. Call Amendment 152 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 102. Megan Gallagher on behalf of Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 153 2 be agreed to? Are we all agreed?
No. Yes.
No, we are not agreed. So, members in favour of Amendment 152, please raise your hands. And those against? And any abstentions? Thank you very much. On Amendment 152, there were 3 votes in favour and 4 votes against. Amendment 152 is disagreed to. Thank you very much. I call Amendment 211 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 102. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call Amendment 411 in the name of Mark Griffin, already debated with Amendment 102. Mark Griffin, to move or not move? Not moved. Thank you. I call Amendment 212 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 102. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call Amendment 566 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 102. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call Amendment 416 in the name of Mark Griffin, already debated with Amendment 102. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call Amendment 106 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 102. Megan Gallagher, to move Amendment 106 or not?
Moved.
106. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 106 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No. Yes.
No, we are not agreed. There will be division. Those in favour of Amendment 106, please show your hands. Those against 106, please show. And any abstentions? Thank you. On Amendment 106, there were 3 votes in favour of 106 and 4 votes against 106. 106 is therefore disagreed to. Thank you very much. I call Amendment 107 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 85. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Given the discussions that we've had today, convener, moved.
Moved. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 107 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I call Amendment 294 in the name of the Minister. Oh, beg your pardon. Call Amendment 294 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 281. Minister, to formally move.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 294 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
No. We are not agreed. There will be division. Those in favour of Amendment 294, please show. And those against. And any abstentions? On Amendment 294, there were 6 votes in favour and 1 vote against. The amendment is therefore agreed to. Thank you. Now we are 56. Call Amendment 56 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 51. Graham Simpson, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. Thank you. Now call Amendments 295, 296, 297, 298, 299 and 300, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated with Amendment 281. I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendments 295 to 300 en bloc.
Moved on block, convener.
Does any member object to a single question being put on Amendments 295 to 300?
I object.
Object. Okay. The question is that Amendment 295 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
No. There will be a vote. Those members in favour of Amendment 295, please show. And those against. And any abstentions. Thank you. Now, on Amendment 295, there were 6 votes for and 1 vote against. That amendment is agreed to. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 296 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
No. We are not agreed. Those in favour of Amendment 296, please show. And those against. And any abstentions. On Amendment 296, there were 5 votes in favour and 2 votes against. Amendment 296 is therefore agreed to. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 297 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes, we are. Oh, no, we're not. Thank you. There will be a division, therefore. Those in favour of Amendment 297, please show. And those against. And any abstentions. Thank you. In Amendment 297, there were 5 votes in favour and 2 votes against. The amendment is therefore agreed to. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 298 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
No, we're not. There will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 298, please show. And those against. And any abstentions. Thank you. On Amendment 298, there were 5 votes in favour, 2 votes against. The amendment is therefore agreed to. Thank you. On Amendment 299, the question is that Amendment 299 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
No. We're not agreed. There will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 299, please show. And those against. And any abstentions. Thank you. On Amendment 299, there were 6 votes in favour, 1 vote against. That amendment is therefore agreed to. Thank you. And the question is that Amendment 300 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes, we are. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, I call Amendment 57 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 51. Mr Simpson, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call Amendment 301 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 281. Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 301 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
No. There will be a division. Those in favour of Amendment 301, please show. And those against. And any abstentions. Thank you. On Amendment 301, there were 6 votes in favour and 1 vote against. The amendment is therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 302 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 281. Minister, to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 302 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
No, we are not agreed. We'll proceed to a vote. Those in favour of Amendment 302, please show your hands. And those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. In Amendment 302, there were 6 votes in favour and 1 vote against. The amendment is therefore agreed to. Thank you. I call Amendment 108 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 85. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 108 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes? No? Just ask colleagues to be a little bit louder. So we are not agreed. Proceed to a vote. Those in favour of Amendment 108, please show. And those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. On Amendment 108, there were 3 votes in favour and 4 votes against. The amendment is therefore not agreed to. is this in a section? The last one is a section. Right. Bear with me a second. Need to do this though. Okay. Members, I'm just advised that we could possibly do with a short suspension at this point as well to consider how much further we can proceed given the timings that the committee members have agreed to contribute to this part of stage 2. So perhaps another 5 minutes, please. Thank you.